Sometimes we feel like we are stuck in the same conflict on repeat. This is because when conflict is not handled right, it quickly becomes exhaustive and just repeats over and over again. So this is what we're going to change today. We're going to talk about conflict and how there's a specific turning point where if you change one choice, you can change the outcome of conflict from negative to positive. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Talia Nilsson, a certified peace builder and mediator. This channel is all about sharing practical tools and principles to help you build peace in your relationships. Last time, we talked about how fear and conflict can negatively impact the outcome of conflict, and how shifting your perception from fearful to positive can change conflict drastically. So if you haven't watched that video, go check it out because it lays a great foundation for this video today. So what happens if we hold on to a negative perception of conflict and live in that fear of conflict? We'll go through an example to illustrate the outcome, and then we're going to change one thing in this example and see how the outcome of conflict will change if you focus on the turning point that we're focusing on today. Okay, the example we're going to use is your partner is late for a well-anticipated date, and they didn't even text you or call you to let you know that they're late, so you're just sitting there waiting for them, not sure what's going on. So just sit with that for a moment, imagine this in your head, and we're going to use something called a conflict tornado to illustrate how this little situation can explode and escalate conflict in your relationship when you have a fearful and negative perception of conflict. So the situation starts small, right? We're just sitting here waiting for a date, and you're upset because they haven't showed up on time or texted you or called you to let you know what is going on. So this automatically triggers you into the negative perspective of conflict, where you're just kind of annoyed, don't want to see things from their point of view, and don't want to give them the benefit of the doubt because the least they could have done is to text you that they're going to be late. So this perspective that you have of conflict makes you upset and grumpy. When they finally show up, it causes you to snap at them and be like, finally, you decided to come? And as you can imagine, this behavior that you have towards them doesn't make it so they want to react very kindly back to you. And so they get upset too and says, wait, you're acting like I don't even care. It's not like I was partying, I was at work. So your partner has come into the situation and now is also in a negative perception of conflict. They're getting defensive and blaming and kind of justifying away their actions, which is a common response when you attack them like that, saying, well, I'm glad you finally showed up, and does not help the conflict, but rather escalates the situation because they have been invited into this negative perception of conflict. Now you're both upset and grumpy at each other. So this, when we're using the conflict tornado, you can see the arrows come and they start out as kind of small and get bigger as you get more upset at each other. Now, because of this, both of you are seeing the conflict negatively with a destructive perception of conflict, and you're seeing the other person as the problem. Things can only change if they change. If only they weren't here or they said a different thing, then this would not be happening right now. And so we're in this kind of cycle here where you're blaming the other person, and this causes the conflict tornado to get bigger. And you say something else like, well, you never care about my feelings, and you didn't even think to text me or to call me to let me know. And the other person says, well, last week you didn't call me either. And these arrows just keep getting bigger and bigger in this conflict tornado as the conflict escalates. So you can see that the behavior that you are reacting towards your partner and that then they're bringing back to you, it's kind of inviting the same behavior and cycling to make this tornado bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's why we call it a conflict tornado, to illustrate how these conflicts can escalate when you are in a negative or a fearful perception of conflict. Okay, this is a lot. You can imagine the heat of feelings that are going on and how this date is going so far. I'm going to take a step back and just kind of analyze and look at the situation and conflict for a minute. Who in this situation needs to change? Who thinks they need to change? So who is going to change? And how long do you think things are going to kind of just escalate for? You're exactly right. Both of them need to change. Neither of them think they need to change, so they're not going to change, and it's just going to keep escalating out of control unless something happens. And this is a good illustration of how conflict escalates, because when you are in a destructive or negative perception of conflict, you don't think you need to change. You're like, I am the right person. They're the problem. It's all out of my control. If only they had have done something different or said something different, then this never would have happened. And this is all about this negative perception of conflict where you don't feel like you have any control or any desire to be in this conflict or in this space with that person or your partner at the time. Now let's go back to the original situation and the beginning, okay? What is it that they wanted out of this situation, out of this date? They probably wanted a nice evening with their partner, or they probably wanted a little bit of consideration for their feelings, and their partner probably just wanted some understanding as they came late and then to kind of move on from things. But now, seeing how the situation went, did either of them get what they wanted at the beginning? No, neither of them got what they wanted, and it's not going to turn out that way if things keep going how they are right now. So what did they get instead of these anticipated feelings and expectations for the night? They got a lot of hurt feelings, hard words that were said, and a lot of things they're going to have to work through later on after things have kind of cooled down to make sense of what happened tonight. So this is not what they expected, it's not what they wanted, and everyone goes away with hurt feelings, kind of just sad, mad, and upset. This is the outcome of negative conflict or a destructive perception of conflict, where you're not viewing the other person, you're not understanding them or giving them space to be themselves and to share their needs or their fears and what they want in this situation. Obviously, this is a train wreck. This date has gone the worst ever, and you're just left with such hard things to deal with afterwards. But things like this happen every day. Arguments, fights that escalate out of control. And so how do we turn these negative conflicts into positive ones? And so that's what we're going to look at now. We're going to look at how one simple choice in this situation and this example could have changed the outcome from negative to positive. So how do we apply this positive perception of conflict in this situation? It's actually pretty simple. It comes down to one small choice, because as peace building expert Dr. Chad Ford said, how we act and how we see people powerfully influences how they see and act back towards us. Us acting in a certain way kind of invites the same behavior back at us. So let's go back to the beginning of the situation and change one behavior and see how that changes the outcome. Okay, you're sitting there waiting for your partner. You're a little annoyed because they haven't let you know, and this date has been planned for a long time, so they should have known better, okay? The situation is the same, everything is the same, and we're kind of at this turning point with conflict. So at this point, right, at the beginning of a situation where normally you would go into a negative perception of conflict, kind of be annoyed automatically, if you notice yourself going into that situation, having those feelings, this is the key that indicates you're at this turning point in conflict, where you have a choice. You have a choice to go and give in to those feelings of annoyance, of upsetting, of kind of thinking about all the other times that they haven't cared about your feelings and digging yourself deeper into this negative perception of them. Or you can just change one thing, one small choice, and give them the benefit of the doubt. Or just talk generously, or maybe pick up the phone and call them yourself. One small choice that will change the outcome, and we can see. So say you're sitting here at this dinner waiting for them, and instead of getting upset, you just say, maybe traffic is really bad and they don't want to use their phone because they want to follow the law and not talk on their phone while they're driving. Just give them the benefit of the doubt. How would this change? When your partner comes, kind of imagine this as we're going through, instead of being annoyed, you're just a little bit kind of curious as to what happens, hey, how are you doing? What was up? And they're like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. The traffic was terrible and my meeting went late. This is the meeting I've been preparing for a whole month. I kind of just explain the situation, and you're like, you know what? That's okay. I know that we've been planning this date, and you explain that your feelings were hurt because they didn't, contact you that they were going to be late, but they say, I'm so sorry, I will do better next time. And you say, that's okay. And you move on. So can you see how this situation is very different than the other one, obviously? It doesn't end in hard feelings or explosive conflicts. This actually ends in the outcome that they wanted originally happening. They end up having a nice date together. And you notice that the person didn't ignore their needs or their wants. They said, I was kind of hurt that you didn't text or call me and I was left here waiting. And the partner says, I'm so sorry, I will do better, and kind of commits to do better and to change. And they forgive each other, talk about it, and then they move on, having a better date together because they've taken time to meet each other's needs. And so this is an example of how one small choice can really change the outcome of the whole conflict. Maybe this seems a little fantastical to you and just oh, that would never happen. But the trick in this situation is that one person chose to not act destructively or not act negatively in a potential conflicting situation where most people would be upset, most people would be annoyed. They just chose, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm just going to ask them how it's going, give them a chance to explain their side of things. Then I'll explain my side of things, that I was, upset I did that they didn't call, I didn't hear from them. And then you can make amends and try to be better and move on and have a good time. So now let's look back at this conflict tornado that we had at the beginning. So the situation is still the same. The action is the same. Your partner is late. We draw this first arrow. But you decide to just give them the benefit of the doubt and not escalate the conflict further. And so the arrow just goes right back down to the beginning. They share their side of things. You share your side of things. And the arrow is just totally dissolved. This tornado just gone. Because of this one small choice, this turning point in conflict. And conflicts don't have to spiral out of control. They don't have to become these endless cycles, but sometimes we get stuck in that trap because we don't know how to get out of them. And so this is the key to this whole video, is that the key to getting out of endless conflicts and arguing every day in destructive conflict is this turning point where normally you would get upset, and that's your indication to yourself that, what if I just chose something differently today? What if I just chose to give them the benefit of the doubt and change that one thing and then see what happens? Because I can guarantee you, based on research that has been done by peace-building experts around the world, that this one change will de-escalate situations that would normally explode into conflicts. I think my favorite thing about this whole idea of conflict tornado and conflicts escalating and then de-escalating them with one simple choice is that conflict then becomes a time and a place where you can understand more about your partner. See, at this date that you're waiting for your partner, instead of things just exploding out of control and hurt feelings being had and the day ending, you instead have a chance to explain to your partner your feelings about how when they didn't talk to you, it didn't meet this need to be an equal in the relationship because it didn't feel like they valued you. So it's a chance to learn more about your partner, and they respond similarly, explaining and apologizing, and it ends with a commitment to change and to be better together. Not someone's the problem and I'm not the problem, you change, not me. They both change together. They both commit to communicate better and to have better thoughts and experiences and give the benefit of the doubt to the other person. And so conflict becomes this positive thing. Instead of spiraling out of control, it becomes something that actually makes relationships stronger, makes connection last, and leaves people feeling more heard and understood than they would have otherwise. If this resonated with you, this concept of conflict tornadoes and de-escalating and escalating conflict, I want you to think to yourself, what's one action I can do to change a situation that would normally get me upset and end in a conflict? What's one thing I can change? What's my turning point? And I want you to do that, because this is the whole point of all of these principles, is that we apply them in our own lives. Thank you so much for being here. I've loved talking with you, and I hope that you share your takeaways in the comments, and we'll see you next time.